on that note, we can do whatever we think in our mind that we can do, and we can solve whatever problem we think in our mind that we can solve. Welcome everyone to the IMG Research Consortium Roundtable Scientific Session, where we pick a topic every day and we discuss and we talk about how to demystify clinical research, all aspects of clinical research, from the simple case reports to the more complex interventional studies. Today, we're going to be having a guest speaker amongst us. He's a scholar, a researcher par excellence, finished from University of District of Columbia as a cancer research scientist, currently internal medicine resident in Bronx in New York, United States of America. He's written lots of articles. He's published lots of articles. He's a well-grounded physician in publication. Dr. Tobe Chukwu Okobi, he's also from Nigeria because we're very proud of our country, although he's in the United States, a resident of the United States. Welcome to our forum today.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving me the platform and having me on this session today. Okay, I'm trying to share my screen. I have a simple PowerPoint. It's nothing too extensive. It's simple. I guess one of the things we're trying to do, or one of the things Dr. Eddie is trying to do, is demystify research, as he will always say. Before I got into research, the idea was that research was exclusively reserved for the high and mighty, the Albert Einsteins. You had to have the eureka moment to, have publications or, put your name out there. And for a lot of us coming from Nigeria, that was the understanding that we had, but we got into research with a lot of curiosity, because we wanted to figure out if we all had to be the Albert Einstein to come up with, something outstanding. And frankly, I realized very early on that we didn't have to be Albert Einstein to put out, beautiful projects or beautiful research, or put our names in the scientific world. And so, in the spirit of demystifying clinical research, this conversation today is going to be as simple as it can ever be. Dr. Eddie, thank you for the platform again. My name is Tobe Chukwu Okobi. Just a bit about myself. I went to med school in Nigeria, Ambrose Ali University, Boma, Edo State, Nigeria. And when I was done, I did this internship that we would typically do. Now, this bit about myself is going to progress into how research came about. That's really what the focus of my introduction is about. So I did my internship at Ahmadu Bello University Teaching Hospital, and there I got some oncology exposure. It used to be a very big oncology institute. Their pediatric oncology was amazing. And so that interest in oncology began to, develop. And I decided, okay, what next was I going to do? Okay, I want to do a master's. I wanted to do residency here in the US. I was like, okay, fine. What can we do? Especially with the background that I had an interest in oncology. So I applied to University of District of Columbia. They had a cancer biology, program that was in affiliation with Georgetown University. So there I did my master's in cancer biology, and I had a lot of research exposure, both laboratory research and clinical research. And in the spirit, again, of demystifying research, I worked with a PI who was an outstanding researcher. He had published over 2,000 or more publications. He had thousands of citations. Guy is an amazing researcher. But something I looked at his work. I was like, okay, why does he have so much citation? Why does he have so much publication? And I realized that what he did was what we are doing, demystifying research, and not really looking for the high and mighty, but looking for the very basic, very, very basic questions. the project we worked on, I worked with him on that project. And interestingly, he got, that project was NIH funded, was on genetic testing for prostate cancer. It was that basic. I can assure you it was that basic, except that it was a randomized control trial, and they had a whole team. He had urologists on board. It was a multi-centered randomized control trial. But he was just looking at BRCA1/2 genes in prostate cancer and how they determine severity and outcome of the disease. He also decided to replicate the same thing for breast cancer. Right. So that became the stream of publications amongst the other things that he did. Not to discredit him, he's an amazing researcher, but I didn't see that pembrolizumab, that's tocilizumab, that high fallopian. People do that. Don't get me wrong, absolutely. But the point I'm making is, we all don't have to do that. Whatever it is you're putting out there, as long as it is thorough, as long as it's adding to, research knowledge, So that's how I got to where I am with that, research background. And right now I'm doing residency in internal medicine with with a lot of research as well, because I'm looking to do my fellowship in hem-oncology. So that's a bit about me.
So talking about replicating ideas. So our topic today is how to conceptualize research idea. Because a lot of people that I've come across, like you have said, they really think it has to be one big goal, one big ginormous thing. So they walk us through how do we go, just start from the basics. How do we think of an idea to do? How do we think of that topic? How do we think of that thing to write? How does this inspiration come? We just listen to a video on working on your subconscious mind. Just walk us through.
Thank you. So the first thing is, I know we're from a research body. Before I go into this, so everything I'm going to be sharing today is going to be my personal knowledge. It's not representative of the institutions or the associations I'm affiliated with. But that being said, understanding the basics of research. I don't intend to go into the details because I know we've had some talk sessions that have explained to us about what research is, but that really is pivotal to leading us into how to generate research ideas. And so I saw this NIH publication by S. Tunis et al. From 2002, and they briefly defined clinical research. This was really about clinical research, but this definition kind of did it for me because it covered some of the fundamentals of what research should be about. And in their words, they said it's a component of medical and health research. Well, clinical research now is a component of medical and health research intended to produce knowledge valuable for understanding human disease, preventing and treating illness, and promoting health. Very simple, straightforward definition, but it really catches the essence of what we are doing and what we're constantly doing. So it starts off with a curious mind. It starts off with a mind that is, has a goal to produce knowledge. Now, if you look at this definition, it doesn't say produce new knowledge. It doesn't say produce outstanding knowledge. It doesn't say produce the eureka knowledge. It just says produce valuable knowledge, that'll help us understand human disease. And so the first point really is, I have a very busy slide that I'm going to move on to. And when Dr. Ed talked to me about having this conversation, he really wanted us to make it very interactional, very conversational. And I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do that. So I'm going to go to my next slide. It's a bit busy, but I don't want us to focus so much on it as much as I want us to focus on, the interaction that we're going to have. And what I'm looking to do is to kind of ask us our experiences using each of the individual components and have Eddie as well moderate us through as well. But so it's a busy slide. Let's not focus so much on it. But it starts off with having a curious mind. And as medical doctors, as clinicians, as scientists, depending on the your career path, as nurses, as biologists, whatever profession we may be from. Pardon me if I don't capture everybody, but I think we have a curious mind enough to be a part of research, to be a part of the body of research. Because when we went through our career path up to where we are now, a lot of the things we did was ask at least one WH question: why, when, where, who. We did ask all of those questions, whether it was during our exams, whether it was during our presentations at school, or whatever it was, we had that component, and that's really foundational to generating research ideas. And so this table, I have the source under and some references. What they did was try to break it down into subsections, so that way you could think about, if you're very prolific at generating ideas, you could just come up with ideas based off on what you're doing, based off on what you're seeing around you, based off on the gaps that you've noticed. But they kind of subdivided, the sections of research, so to speak. So that way it's easy for us to, identify where we could come up with ideas from.
So let's look at your first the first point that Robinson, Saldeher, and McCoy, and Moller and Botch, this work was credited to them. Brilliant work. They were trying to see how they could guide many researchers into creating ideas for themselves. And I think the first thing that they were trying to talk about was, you can create an idea looking at an evidence gap. And I'm sure many of us have come across evidence gaps in our clinical practice, or in our everyday life, or in our environment, or where you live. It mustn't be, like Dr. Tobe said in the beginning, Dr. Kobe said in the beginning, it mustn't be one special science guarded nuclear weapon research lab, just around where you are, and you are looking at a topic. Dr. Tobe, tell us more about this evidence gap.
Okay, so I was in rounds one, all until when I started residency. I of course, atovaquone, we all know, is used for PCV prophylaxis and treatment. But so here they give 1.5 gram orally daily for prophylaxis, and then they give 750 milligram BID for treatment. So the first time I heard this dosage regimen, I was kind of curious. If you look at it closely, you're really actually giving 1.5 gram daily, if for prophylaxis and for treatment. So again, the regimen is 1.5 gram daily for prophylaxis, and for treatment, you're giving 750 milligram BID. So 750 milligram BID translates to 1.5 gram if you just look at it, on the surface value like that. So I began to ask myself, why was the regimen designed like that? Why did they have to say 750 milligram BID and 1. And I had this pharmacist who was rounding with us, and I was like, is there anything about the pharmacokinetics or pharmacodynamics that could have explained the dosage regimen that there was? And this was her response. And she said, and we wanted to research about it, so I said, okay, go back, look up what you can find, and let's see. And we looked up, the publications. There were very few publications, very, very few publications. It turned out to be that the initial studies that were done, and the initial very few studies that were done based off on those regimen. And FDA, subsequently approved it that way. So evidence gap. This is an instance of evidence gap. How much information is there about a certain thing that we're looking to research on? And because we're human scientists, human researchers, we're focusing a lot more on human research here, medical knowledge. So how much information is there? You could type up, when COVID happened, I remember Dr. Ed and I were in the middle of COVID, that initial first week of COVID. And I remember calling Eddie and I said, there's so much knowledge gap at this point right now, so much evidence gap, so much. I mean, everybody could tell there was so much evidence gap. Dr. Fauci, there was so much evidence gap. And whoever put out anything at that point was going to add to knowledge, irrespective of what you put out.
Right. And, you know, talking about this evidence gap, I know many of us must have come across, you know, different patterns in wherever we are. And you mustn't be in a hospital. I'll give you an example, another type of evidence gap. One day, I took my wife to, when she was pregnant for my twin babies, my beautiful twin daughters, and I took her to an obstetric clinic. And they told us to come back. They gave us a schedule to come back once every 4 weeks, then once every 2 weeks, then once every week. And I know Dr. Evo, who is also a family physician here, must have. We all know, many obstetricians here know that schedule, once every 4 weeks, once every 2 weeks, and once every week in the third trimester. Right? Dr. Evo, right? I think something like that. Yeah, in the fourth trimester you come, in the third trimester you come every week. And I was just asking my wife, how did they come across this once every 4 weeks and once every 2 weeks and once every week, this antenatal schedule? And for a researcher, the first thing that came to my mind was to look up, do a review and see the history of antenatal visits. And believe me, I didn't find much. So that may have been anecdotal. And it could be a very simple research topic for someone, outcomes of patients who adhere to the traditional guideline versus the people that follow, because there are other hospitals that don't run the traditional guideline, and they just tell you to come next week, next 2 weeks, or they use the risk assessment model, you know, to tell you to come for antenatal visits. You know, and that could be, that's just a thought process everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I mean, we're going to, making it, as part of making a conversation, I'm going to, you know, call on a few of us to just share our experiences as it pertains to evidence gap. But I wanted to just quickly give another example, especially again with COVID. If you notice how the guidelines were consistently changing, especially in that initial first few weeks of COVID, it was a lot about personal experience, especially those who were, you know, experienced in the field, those who were virologists who, you know, they came up with postulations based off on patterns they had seen, based off on their experiences. It wasn't, there were no existing standard protocols before we had COVID. It was, you know, so, you know, somebody wakes up and says, you know, I've done this over 20 years. I haven't seen anything like this, but I know that organisms in this pattern do this and this and this, you know, and by virtue of this, I think for now we can begin to do this. And that's how some of the antiretrovirals that were used for COVID at the time were initially, you know, used until the guidelines continued to evolve because people started asking WH questions and people started writing up stuff. Some were great papers, some were not great papers, but it did influence the medical knowledge that we had because there was a lot of evidence gap at the time. Yeah.
I don't know if anyone has any, you know, evidence gap experience to share. It's a roundtable talk. You feel free to chime in. We're just going to spend 30 minutes and then we're done, or probably 30 minutes or 40 minutes. Dr. Zane.
I was seeing Dr. Fumilola, who was kind of relating to the COVID story. So I don't know if you had a personal experience or an experience at the time or anything.
Yes, I did. I worked as an epidemiologist during that time. Even though I don't have a strong research background, but I realized our guidelines for clearance was changing almost every week.
Absolutely.
So we have to do contact tracing and find contacts, and we're going to tell the school teachers this week. Next week, something else came up. So every week we had to update. So I really could relate to what you were saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so in developing a research idea and conceptualizing a research idea, evidence gap is a potential niche, is a potential gold mine for everyone to, you know, tap in. Every day you walk, you have to look around you and say, why? You have to ask the question, why did they decide to give chloroquine 400 milligrams? And you can then review, do what a retrospective. If you don't really have the tools to do these interventional studies, Remember, we've talked about the different types of studies. You can look back. You can do a cohort, an observational study, and look back, or observe people moving forward. You can design a protocol, observing people to follow up and look deeply into this evidence gap. Let's jump into the next key aspect of conceptualizing research idea, knowledge gap. Dr.
Absolutely. So yeah, knowledge gap. So going by the way these guys have broken down this table, it's easy for us to think about these components and think about research ideas. With knowledge gap, so right now the team, the IMG research team, is working on a breast cancer project. And the topic is very straightforward, high-fat diet and breast cancer. It's as simple as that. But we're doing something a bit different to address a knowledge gap. We have case control studies. We have cohort studies. There are looking at, diet and breast cancer. We know that there's some relationship with diet, high-fat diet particularly, and breast cancer. Yes, we do know that. But what we decided to do was do a meta-analysis. So there is an association between high-fat diet and breast cancer, yes. But what is the strength of association? And we all know, because we've had conversations about the types of research, case controls, meta-analysis, review papers. I don't want us to go into those details, but with that knowledge, we understand that the meta-analysis helps us determine the strength of association. Is there really an association? And if there is, what is the strength? We're using odd ratios, hazard ratios, all of those things, confidence intervals, to look at whether or not there's a significant association. And that's what one of the papers we're working on is about. It's as simple as that, but imagine how much it strengthens the knowledge base there is. It's
absolutely. You remind me of another paper we worked. I think we worked with Dr. Fumilola on approaches to medication administration in patients who lack insights. And when we did a very extensive literature search, there were no interventional studies to study how to give medication to people who lack insights. Everything that has been written, or almost everything, probably, let me just talk like a statistician, probably 99.9% with some error margin, or 97%, or let's say 2 standard deviation confidence interval, 2 standard deviation from left and right. They were all based on anecdotal theories on people saying, oh, we're going to do this, or there was a complete knowledge gap. And we stated it in the paper that, hey, there's no randomized control trial that sought to find out how do you give medication to someone who simply lacks insight, someone who simply doesn't want to take his medication. Absolutely. And those are examples of knowledge gap. Dr. Tobe, you want to talk more? If you have any contribution to make, you're free to speak up, chime in into the conversation. We're discussing conceptualizing research ideas and how to design, how to develop something that you want to write about, something that you want to research, something that you want to do.
Absolutely. I'm going to, I'm sorry, we're just calling out on people. It's just part of, making it very conversational and having us share our experiences. What I decided to do was not to go into the theories of this concepts, but if we're able to share experiences and examples that we can relate to, that way it's really, more practical for us. I know Dr. Faithful Ogundiran is listening in. I'm not sure if you're available to kind of share, if you have any experiences with where there could be knowledge gap. Faithful Ogundiran, permit me, I'm not sure if I should add a doctor or.
Yeah, almost everyone here is a doctor.
Okay, sounds perfect. Dr. Faithful, I don't know if you're with us. While we're waiting for artists to, kind of chime in. So I was in rounds one fateful day, and this was again during COVID. And, we were talking about remdesivir use and, renal disease. And the attending, the guy was like, okay, hold on a minute. And then he pulled up Google and he typed his name. And I was like, why is he typing his name in remdesivir and ESRD? And he was like, hold on. And then he pulled up the paper and he was like, look. I was like, okay, what's going on? And he showed us his name. The guy was so excited to show us that he had published a review paper on ESRD and remdesivir. And guess what? Dr. Ed and I had a paper. This was from way back. We had a paper on remdesivir and ESRD. And when the attending left, I called the medical students who were with me. I was like, hold on a minute. And I pulled up the same paper. I was like, knowledge gap, right? This is knowledge gap. I also have a contribution to this. And if you look closely, you would see if for us who are practicing or us who are looking at guidelines, you would see that these guidelines are referencing people, Muller-Bloch, Krantz et al. They're really referencing people. And who are these people? Some of them are Albert Einsteins, I agree. But interestingly, very few of them, because you and I know that in medicine, we don't have geniuses. We have amazing doctors, amazing people who are, but I'm sorry if it sounds that I'm not trying to be derogatory, but you know that extra 1.1% kind of group of people, we're all just amazing people doing the best that that we love to do. So these references are you and I who are contributing to this information, except that these organizations pull up this paper and say, oh yeah, this paper, okay, fine. So let's use this paper to influence our guidelines, So that's a typical example of, knowledge gap and how it can make a difference in terms of research.
So another example of a knowledge gap, I'm just giving people examples to stimulate our thought process, is when we were having the debate on what's the effect of cannabis. There's a huge argument on the use of marijuana, cannabis, one of the contents of marijuana, in so many things, in depression. Currently, I think one of our cardiovascular leaders is looking at the effect of marijuana on the cardiovascular system. I want to say this, some research have been done, but you are also allowed to test someone's theory. You can test another person's theory. It's another thing that we want to talk about when we jump into empirical gap and methodology gap. I could say in methodology gap, I could say the way you arrived at your conclusion, saying that there's more people with hypertension in the Black population compared to the white population, the way you arrived at it is wrong. And I will replicate your study, referencing you, saying, hey, I'm going to replicate this particular study in this particular geographical region, or this particular new niche, or this particular new place, testing your theory. I'm not testing your hypothesis. Your hypothesis is is the question that you asked. Now, after your hypothesis, you did your research and you came up with a theory that there is more death in the white population compared to the Black population. For example, just using an example, I could say the methodology, the way you did it, was faulty, and I test it and I design a new approach or a new study design, and I come up with a new theory. And that was how so many of those Earth was flat was debunked, that Earth is round. If, I don't know who, I think it was Albert Einstein, whoever got that theory, if that person did not test the Roman hypothesis that the Earth was flat, and he said, no, the Earth is not flat. Same thing with the MC squared equation. People have tested it and have found faults in it. And so many other theories have been tested and have been debunked. So in this methodological gap approach, you can actually look at what Edward et al. Did, read it, and say, I think there was a lot of bias. They included smokers, for example. Why would they include smokers? Smokers may have biased, the smoking may have biased the outcome. Let me do the same study, but this time around, I'm going to remove I'm going to find a way to remove the confounder, smokers, and then see a new result. And then I come up with a new theory and say, oh, wow, what we did before was faulty. Because, so Dr. T, you want to talk about this methodological gap?
Absolutely. Let me just quickly talk about practical knowledge, because the example you're giving can also help us discuss a bit about practical knowledge. So guidelines again, which of course are all based on research, publications and existing literature. And then guidelines say, for example, give tocilizumab, for example, give it at this certain dose. For example, when monkeypox came out, we had a few cases of monkeypox that we were privileged to manage. And they were based off on guidelines, existing guidelines that we had. But then, for example, where you're working, you have an approach, you have a guideline, but then you're seeing that, there's some things you want to do differently based off on your experience, as a clinician, or based off on the patterns that you're seeing where you're working. Okay, this is the guidelines, but I don't think this is working with our population, our type of population. Right. Say, for example, that study was designed in, African, exact Caucasians, and you're working in an area that's predominantly African American or predominantly Asian or predominantly, whatever it may be. For example, if we were practicing in Nigeria or in South Africa, translating that guideline into what we're doing may not generate the same results. And so practical knowledge gap, what are we doing at our facilities? And how does it differ a bit from what there is? And, we're putting all of that data together, putting all of that information together out there and saying, yes, we agree there's a guideline. We agree that this is the consensus, but we're seeing a very different pattern, based off on, our patient population, or based off on the experiences that we're having. So practical knowledge gaps that exists between, what is termed the standard in quotes and what we're really seeing where we're at, the responses that we're getting, is a very, very good example of that gap. And then, yeah.
That reminds me of, many case reports that people do, or you in this our research forum want to do, maybe addressing this knowledge gap, because the medical community want to see a unique evidence-based way of managing patients, something that you did, something that that worked for you, something that is working for this particular patient, or how eventually this patient was, you reduce length of hospital stay, or you reduce side effects, or you reduce cost of medical care, or an approach that's ethically, approved that you did in this particular subset of population that, helped, better patient management or follow-up management. So most case reports that we write or that you write, also addresses this. So if you're thinking of how to write a case report, what do you write in your case report? Knowledge gaps are absolute gold mine in, writing case report. Knowledge gap addresses, like Dr. Kobe said, guidelines. What are the guidelines? What is unique in this subsector? What is unique in this subgeographical region? What is unique in this patient population? If there's anyone that wants to chime in, Dr. Ade Adosu, I see you there. I know you're also a prolific researcher. You can also chime in from wherever you are. Dr. Ade, can you hear me? Right, go ahead. While we wait for more people to join in.
So speaking about methodological gap, I mean, what makes research different from the typical WH questions? I mean, we ask these questions every day. Where will I find? Who will? What is? What? Do ask those questions. But then, what makes the difference is that research has, successfully developed a methodology that is replicable, that has been proven and tested, that is, ethically safe and sound, protecting especially the participants that you're recruiting into that study, or, that you're writing about, or stuff like that. So methodological gaps could be something that you're also, a source of a research idea. I'll give an example that Dr. Ed can relate to. Remember when, again, with COVID, there was a lot I learned from COVID, a lot. the typical research approach was to recruit participants to your study. So you will have them come to the hospital and they see a doctor, and the doctor says, okay, I think you're fit for this study. Do you want to be enrolled into the study, stuff like that. And then with COVID happened, people weren't coming to the hospital. And a group of people, thought to themselves and said, with this methodology, can we switch it up a bit? Can we take research to them? Can we go to their facilities rather than have them come to our clinic? Right now, they're not even able to come to our clinic. Nobody's moving. So let's get a group of researchers and send them out to the field and kind of switch up the methodology, right? And that became, a novel approach to research, something that was almost never in existence all until, COVID happened and the methodologies began to change. Right. So that's for maybe like a controlled trial or an actual study, but you could really look at existing papers there are and say, what was the method that was, used in this? Most of the studies, if they are reviews, if they are as simple as reviews, how reviews write and say, I did a PubMed index, that's the methodology. I did a PubMed index and I used the search words and I looked at papers between this and this. You could say, okay, why did you have to look at papers between this and this? What was influencing your choice of that duration? Why didn't we look at papers between this other, this other? Okay, the ones you looked at were 10 years old. Let's look at 10 years, very recent, and see if there's been any changes in pattern. So methodological gaps could be an idea, for building research questions or research topics that could make the difference.
Absolutely. Talking about the what you raised during COVID, it reminded me of the offspring, not really the offspring, the harvest of telemedicine and all these telecalls that we're just having. Before now it wasn't as pronounced as it was, but now we're having so much telemedicine. People are looking at a new method, a new way of doing things, and that could also trigger a lot of research ideas. And someday I was telling my wife, do you know that we can actually have a telemedicine clinic for people in Africa here?
Absolutely.
Efficiently running, and then probably making our impact sitting here. And I know a lot of us make all these phone calls, free phone calls, and having a lot of things. So it could be a research idea where someone could say, okay, how do we design an effective telemedicine transcontinental that will work? Because I know that people in Australia also do telemedicine, even to people in other countries. And what has been the outcome of these telemedicine industries? Let's see what has been their health intervention outcomes. Their patients, are they having less hospitalization? Are they having less adverse events? Are they being more controlled in their metrics, in the metrics that we use to monitor their health indices? So a lot of research idea. Because of time, today we'll jump to almost the last to the population gap, which is a big.
Sorry, before you go on, I have a question. Can I ask a question now? Do I read?
Sure, go ahead.
So I just wanted to say that the telemedicine thing is even on. I know somebody that was going to recruit me to do medicine for Nigeria, but I was like, I'm not licensed here. But then my question is, so if I'm going to have a research idea from the methodology gap, for example, the years that you mentioned, to differentiate it from the previous study, will it now be that I state in my methodology that my own covers more than 10 years, or what would be the differentiating factor from that? Because it will be like a replication of somebody else's job. So how do I differentiate it if I'm going to do that?
Dr. Tobe, you want to chime in before I say?
Yes. So first off, now replicating an idea there's nothing wrong with replicating an idea. As far as I know, this is based off on my personal experience, right? There's a concept of plagiarism, but that concept of plagiarism is when you're literally copy pasting, something like that, right? But then we know a lot about that. But you see a publication, and the publication says this and this and this, right? And for me, I never think about it as replicating an idea. No, I think about it as this idea. What can I do differently about this idea?
What is deficient about it?
Yeah, what can I change? What can I improve? And so the idea says breast cancer review paper between 2009 and 2015. And I say, okay, fine. Recent review on breast cancer. You know, like you understand what I mean? So it may be, so you're, and then even in the paper, you're confident to say that, you know, part of the things I did was review the papers that looked at 2000 and 2010, you know, and the guidelines, what they said was this and this and this and this, you know, but the part of the gap I'm trying to fill up is find out if there's been any changes that has happened after that period that they've looked at. So you're talking about them, you're referencing, there's nothing wrong at all, as long as you properly reference and say, you know, this guys did something that I also looked at. I looked up this paper. You're not copying, pasting whatever they're doing. You're just saying, oh, they said that in 2010 this happened. But I'm also looking to see if after 2010 there's been any changes in the patterns that they observed, you know, and I'm reviewing these guys and I'm reviewing those guys. And so yes, switching up your ideas a bit, yes. But it can stem off an existing idea. As a matter of fact, it should stem off an existing idea. Medicine has been on since the BCs, right? So if we're not stemming off existing ideas, then I'm not, like, you know, we're trying to evolve the medicine from what was yesterday into what is today. And our kids are going to come evolve what we have today into tomorrow, you know, and that's how the guidelines keep changing, which is what it should be in the first place.
Dr. Babalola, I hope he addressed you. So in replicating methodology, you have to state clearly what methodology there was before, and then what new thing that you're adding, what are you bringing, what are you switching up, what are you switching? You could switch up in terms of number of years. This one was done between 2001 to 2010. I'm doing more recent advances between 2010, like Dr. Today said, and 2022. But this one was done in all age population, and they excluded the Medicare, that's 65 and above population. I'm going to include all age population plus Medicare 65 and above, right? Well, this one was done mostly in using the Pearson correlation for the analysis. I'm going to use the whatever type of correlation, whatever type of the MAC correlation, for example.
Sorry to interrupt you. Say, for example, there's a new software to do the data analysis, you know, from what they used in 2009. Definitely there are new softwares. And you could say, oh, these guys did this analysis with SPSS version 10 or version whatever there was at the time. You know, I want to do this analysis with a more recent version, see if there's any changes in results, something like that.
Yeah, and also remember that in research, your result must not necessarily be positive. It may just be, oh, I found similar finding, or no, I found something different, or it's inconclusive. My results can be inconclusive. Don't forget about quickly, we have about 10 more minutes to go. A population gap is a big issue in these days, especially in this age of health disparity. There's a lot of research that has been done in population X that was not done in population Y. There's a lot of dosages, medications that people take in population. People take because of researches that were done in population X, and then they generalized the finding in population X and said, oh, that's how it's going to be for population Y. I know so many of us are physicians who must have come across this data flying around. Dr. Okobi, tell us more about this generating, conceptualizing ideas on using population gap.
So one big tip, very big tip for a lot of us in residency, a lot of us aspiring to come into the residency, a lot of us doing research. Something I know from the oncology standpoint is that disparity research is big. It's a big one. This AACRO guys, this Association of Cancer Society guys. I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing their names properly, but a lot of these associations are big on disparity research, because the trend now is, if you notice the times we're in now, different groups, right, are coming up to say we're not properly represented, both in politics, both in medicine, both in, lifestyle, even in World Cup. For some of us who are soccer lovers, we would see that, these groups also exist there, and this concerns exist there, where they're saying we're not included. And research, this all stemmed from research, when they focused on a certain group to say, oh, these guys, these people, we should do research on these people, and we shouldn't do research, and all of the ethical issues there are with those concepts. I don't want to go into it, but focusing on disparity research, population research is big, and you could always find research gaps there. It's well known that the underserved, the African American, Hispanics are underrepresented in studies. And so if you're working in an area that is predominantly populated by this group, okay, so the project I was working with my PI, he was in Georgetown. Georgetown, if you understand, is in DC, and it's predominantly white, as a matter of fact. And so I sent him an email and I said, hello, sir, I of course, he knows the trajectory and, the fact that I'm working here and all that. So I said, I'm noticing, because I'm working in an area that is predominantly African-American and Hispanics, I strongly believe that we can replicate the study that we had. I told him about the study, and I told him, that I believe we can replicate that study in my work environment, because it really will cover, this underserved population that we're not even able to get so much of, where we had initiated that study. And he replied and said, yeah, once we're done with this paper, whatever we're working on at the moment, we're going to swing into, the next project and begin to go from there. So, once you're able to pay attention to those subtle details, you're looking at papers and they're saying this paper was done in Europe, or this paper was done in, let's say, Africa, for example. And you're like, okay, this doesn't really represent the population I'm working with. Can I replicate this study and see if I can, cover for this population I'm working with and see what the changes there are? So population gap, this is really, really huge for us who have, encounters with patients, clinical encounters, or, us who are reviewing papers. And these papers always talk about demographics. For the 6-year-old, I'm looking at adults, or I'm looking at children. And you're like, okay, why are you looking at children? COVID guidelines, they were first looking at adults, and then they started looking at children. So I'm sure somebody, one pediatrician or whoever, woke up one morning and said, why are you looking at only adults? Why can't we not look at children? Why can't we not look at this and all of that? So with age, with sex, with racial groups, and with all the evolving groups there are now, the LGBTQs and all of that, trying to have an all-inclusive research that covers for these groups. One trend I noticed with monkeypox at the time, there was a paper that was trying to look at monkeypox as a sexually transmitted disease, because it was predominantly in men, MSM men who have sex with men. And it kind of was true, because the patients that we saw at the time were, mostly those kind of patients. Sorry, I ran out of my train of thought, but yeah, trying to include, these
the minorities. Right.
Yes.
I'll give you an example of a recent work that we did. I just published, I think today. Dr. Ngozi spearheaded that thought process, and she notice that, okay, let me give you the brief background. Resilience is the ability to perform or to do well. I'm just using layman's definition in life. And all of us, we have trauma or most of us have one form of trauma or another as we're growing up. And it affects our ability to be successful, whatever you define as success, later in life, school success, successful in the society, being able to mingle with the society. And she noticed that there was there have been a lot of papers that are defining resilience and outcome in so many demographics, but no one has actually looked at people with autism and ADHD. Wow. And when she said it, I was like, okay, people have looked at resilience in autism, you know, kids that have autism, how do they eventually turn up? How do they eventually fare in life? But there's a very special population of kids that have autism and are also attention deficits or deficient. They, you know, they have both syndrome together. And very few papers have actually worked on what is the outcome of these kids that have these two syndromes together in terms of school outcome, school performance, social integration, you know, even functioning properly at home, at, you know, social gatherings, churches and mosques and the rest. And then we decided to start from the basics. Let's do a literature review, just a simple literature review, and look at what people have written about this special population, which you can also do when you're creating a research idea. You know, you start from a very simple, looking at what is the already knowledge gap? What's the already knowledge base on this topic that I'm thinking on, this gap that I've identified. So we identified that there was a gap, and then we're looking at what is the knowledge base. So we did a literature review and we published it. The next step we want to do is to actually do a follow-up, a real data gathering, to go to these schools, to go to these parents, to go to these clinics that manage these people that have these special comorbidities and see what is their outcome in the next 5 years. And she has initiated a research. It's going to be a 5-year long research. We're looking for grants for that research. Brilliant idea. And I know it's going to, if we get a good grant writer, we should be able to hit a grant on that particular topic. And God help us in the next 5 years. And a brilliant example. On that note, we'll be rounding up today, running up notes. Before you leave, everyone, the way we usually end our topic, we you know, play the concluding part of our initial video that talks about ideas and conceptualization, and then we'll go from there. Closing thoughts, Dr. today.
Okay, so one research idea. I was going to end with bringing a research idea, an actual research idea, and we can develop. I mean, there's a bit of it on our group, the IMG research group at the moment, but I think it's a brilliant idea. We should all hop on. With oncology, again, I'm more inclined into oncology, so most of the things I say or do is oncology related. But just like COVID is new, immunotherapy is relatively new in oncology. That's where, you know, the trajectory is shifting towards. And a lot of cancer, you have FDA approval for immunotherapy for some cancers, but then not yet for a lot of other cancers, you know, either because of, you know, not too many studies there are, either because of the fact that by basis of pathogenesis, it's not applicable. But looking at immunotherapy in some of the cancers that have not been FDA approved, or looking at immunotherapy in the cancers that FDA has not approved immunotherapy for, is a brilliant idea we can work on now. Because in another 5 years, as a matter of fact, Google it now, you will see people are even writing reviews. I've read up reviews of cancers that have not been FDA approved, and people are writing their opinions. They're saying, you know, we think that, some people are even saying, yeah, this is the reason why we think for now it's not applicable because of, you know, tumor cell margin or this and that, or the molecular patterns that we're seeing in the tumor cells, all of those things. But we could write up any of these things and say, oh yeah, FDA hasn't approved this immunotherapy for this cancer, but we're thinking that in the next few years, based off on this pattern and this trend, this is a possibility, and it's something clinicians should keep at the back of your mind. A one-page review or 1.5-page review with a nice abstract, and we submit it out there. And, you know, you never know, in 5 years, FDA approves it and we say, oh yeah, we saw it coming. We thought FDA was going to approve this based off on this pattern. So we can get research ideas from anywhere. And I will encourage us, first of all, I think a great way to deal with research is not to think of it as highfalutin. A lot of the things that have influenced the practices that we're doing today, were ideas that came from people who were just asking why. Why do I have to wash my hand before and after I see the patient? Why don't I just wash my hand only after I see the patient? You know, and somebody said, okay, let's try both and let's see what the results are. And it as basic as that, and see how it has influenced medicine this much, you know, and these little things as you go add up to the practice and add up to influencing, you know, better healthcare, better patient outcome. And you will be, we will be proud that one day, I'll give just this closing story. You know how I was reading Chigo, this popular Nigerian who was into TV stuff, and she said she used to put out comic clips and all of those, she didn't think so much of it. It was something she did out of pleasure. She loved to do it. And one fateful day, a friend of hers shows up and says, "Hey, Chigo, have you seen this video that is trending this much?" And she was like, "No, it was I haven't seen it." And that video trended so much, it became what brought her to the limelight. Just like this other guy on TikTok or Instagram who doesn't say anything, but, out of, putting out all those videos, he trended and became this big. That's how it is with research. You continue to put out your ideas, you continue to put out what you have. And one fateful day, you put out this amazing work you thought nothing about. You just felt like, man, I did this at the time I was the most tired. And that work becomes what, American Gynae Association, for example, decides to reference. And somebody says, "Oh man, have you seen your paper on, these guys, they referenced you and that paper influenced this guideline." This may be 5 years down the line. It may be 10 years down the line. It may be our kids that will call us to say, "Oh, Daddy, I saw your name on this paper. It influenced this guideline." And you will smile and say, "Yeah, I was flying from Maryland to Boston when I was writing that up." You just brag about it, even though that may not have been the case. But that's how I think about it. That's really the outcome I'm expecting, that someday somebody's going to reference our paper and it will change the trajectory of medicine, even in the tiniest bits, as little as hand washing changed the trajectory of medicine. That's how ours will change the trajectory of medicine. And we will say we've contributed our quota, not just in our patient interaction, but in the body and knowledge of the science of medicine.
We've contributed our quota, not just in our patient interaction, but in the body and science of medicine. On that note, we'll be ending the recording session and we'll go to the ordinary session.